Mike Brown's reputation and his results as a defensive coach in the NBA are certainly encouraging for the future of the Sacramento Kings. But is the addition of Brown enough to really fix this Kings offense? On today's episode of Locked On Kings, I'm going to be joined by Jason Anderson from the Sacramento Bee, who covers the Sacramento Kings. We'll talk about Mike Brown's impact on the defense, Tyrese Haliburton, and more right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all regular season and all off season. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer at ABC 10 News here in the California capital. And one of the people that I have the pleasure of getting to work alongside covering the Sacramento Kings is Jason Anderson from the Sacramento Bee. He does a phenomenal job over there as the main Kings beat writer. See him at most games, most practices, press conference. He is there covering all of it, does great just Kings beat stories in regards to the regular season after games and things like that, more in-depth stories, especially right now during the offseason. And it's been a while since I've had him here on Locked On Kings, so I had to have Jason back on. The main thing I wanted to focus on with Jason is the Sacramento Kings added Mike Brown this offseason, a new head coach, arguably already the best head coach the Sacramento Kings have had since Rick Adelman. And he brings with him a reputation around the league of being able to help defensively, fix defenses, establish defensive systems that work to his personnel, work to his players that ultimately make the Kings a significantly better defensive team than they've been over the last 16 years. And that bar is actually pretty low. But at the same time, the Kings really didn't do much this offseason player-wise to add defensive talent. The Kings seem to believe that they have enough talent on this team to be better or significantly better defensively than they've been in the past, and that Mike Brown can bring that out of him. But is that putting too much on Mike Brown? Or are the Kings relying too heavily on someone who never actually steps on the floor to fix this team defensively? Jason and I are going to discuss that amongst many other topics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Feel free to respond to anything that Jason and I discuss here. You can do so on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. You can email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. Or if you're watching on YouTube, leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. But for now, sit back, relax, enjoy my conversation with the Sacramento Bee's Jason Anderson. As the offseason rolls on, pleasure to be joined by Jason Anderson, who covers the Sacramento Kings for the Sacramento Bee. And Jason, defense is going to be a major thing to pay attention to for the Sacramento Kings next season. You look at the additions that the Kings made personnel-wise or player-wise, and it seems like it's more offensive moves than defensive moves, but they bring in a defensive head coach in Mike Brown. I'm going to ask you specifically about the impact you expect Mike Brown to have for this team in just a second. But we were just talking about this. The Kings were 29th, so second to last in the NBA in points per game allowed last season. In your mind, for the Kings to accomplish their goal of actually making the playoffs, not just the play-in, what does that number have to be at in addition to what we expect to be a pretty good offense next season?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I think, certainly I would agree that the moves they made were more geared towards improving the offense and certainly the shooting. I think this could be a very dynamic offense. When you start to look at a team that could be pretty explosive offensively, I don't think you don't need to be top 15 in defense, but if you can get in that 20 range to even 20 to 25, you're going to win more games. You're looking for marginal improvements here defensively, I think. And, we can't ask too much of Mike Brown. He can't get out there and guard guys himself, unfortunately. But I think he can do some things in terms of the scheme that we can get into a little bit of that. I have some thoughts on how he might do that. I think you're just looking for little marginal improvements here kind of around the edges. And if you can just improve a little bit here and there defensively, win some extra possessions, sometimes games come down to 3 or 4 possessions. And if he can kind of help them fine tune things a little bit on that end of the floor, That certainly could bode well for them.
I know you were being silly and facetious when you said like Mike Brown short of being able to get out there and guard players themselves. But that's one of the questions that I kind of had, or that was kind of the point that I was going to take this to, is the Kings have addressed their defensive issues by bringing in not only a defensive minded head coach, but a coach that is well respected for his defensive schemes and his defensive identity around the NBA. And that's, of course, a positive. Plus, he has a reputation for holding players accountable, which I think is a big deal for the Sacramento Kings going into training camp and going into next season. But it seems like, or it feels like, the Kings are putting so much into the basket of Mike Brown as a guy who never steps onto the floor to fix the defense. I think it's almost a lot, or too much to ask him in a lot of ways, when the personnel largely is the same that has struggled defensively for the last, 16 seasons.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I'll point to 2 or 3 things here that might give Kings fans some hope. And one, I think, is what they've done at the shooting guard position with Herter and Monk. Herter and Monk are both certainly known more for their offense than their defense. Incredible shooters. But, Herter brings some length that they, I guess they had some length with Ty as well, but he's a young guy. Maybe his body hadn't filled out quite as much. Herter, I've talked to some people in Atlanta who watched him really closely, and he's kind of split time between the 2 and the 3 spots there. And, he was asked to kind of guard at the point of attack to cover up for some of Trae Young's weaknesses. And so he's tested in some ways that maybe some of the other 2s and 3s that we've had here in Sacramento haven't been. Malik Monk, again, not a sterling reputation for defense, but I've spoken to some people in Malik's camp who said that he put a big emphasis on defense last year with the Lakers, and that showed up. That showed up on film. It showed up statistically. I don't have numbers in front of me, but he was more effective as a defender last year than he had been before. So you add those 2 guys, you add in, a Keegan Murray who, we'll see. It's a little bit of a blank slate, but we'll see what he can do defensively. I think you ask for individual improvement from guys like De'Aaron Fox and from Harrison Barnes, who may not be as physically strained in terms of asking him to do so much at the 3 and the 4 spots. Maybe that helps him to conserve a little bit of energy and be able to give you a little more. You ask for more from Domantas Sabonis in terms of his individual defense. And then you get into the team defense, which is where I think this team might have a chance to show those marginal improvements I was talking about. And I say that in part because one of the things Mike Brown did with the Warriors last year, Steve asked him to head up the defense. Steve Kerr asked Mike to take charge of the defense. They wanted to get better on that end, and they ended up second in the league, I believe, defensively. And one of the things Mike talked about in a story with Connor Letourneau of the San Francisco Chronicle, and I sort of wrote this when the Kings hired Mike, was so Mike explains why the Warriors went away from a switch-heavy scheme that forced the ball to the middle of the floor in favor of funneling the action and the movement toward their help side defenders. And these are buzzwords that we've heard here in Sacramento because they've been attacked in the middle for years, and they've tried to switch and it hasn't worked. They get, Luke, we all know Luke Walton and Alvin Gentry used to tell us that, look, we got to guard guys for 2 or 3 dribbles or there's no help. You can't help that if you're just giving up straight line drives every time down the floor. So I was really interested to read and to hear these comments from Mike talking about funneling the ball where they wanted to go. And I'll give you a quote from that story. He said, if you try to keep the ball on the sideline or the baseline, that's where the help is built in. To be able to send the ball to where your help is instead of allowing the ball to again get to the middle of the floor, that's something that is very beneficial to our unit as a whole. And so I could see Mike maybe coming in and looking at what the Kings have been doing and maybe making a similar change here in terms of just the scheme and how they do things. And I could see that potentially making a difference for this group. If you're just talking about giving up, one or two less points a game, or, winning 2 or 3 of those possessions, I don't think it's going to take a lot to improve marginally. And another factor, is I think Sabonis and his defensive rebounding. Monty McNair has talked to us about how much better they were in terms of their defensive rebounding when Sabonis was on the floor. And of course, if you grab the defensive rebound, you're not giving up, the second chance opportunity, which is, I don't have that right in front of me either. It's somewhere here. I might be able to find it for you, but I'm working on some stuff for this week that I'm going to touch on this. So they were bad in terms of defensive rebounding, second chance points. And, if you start to clean that up just a little bit, it could make a difference for this team.
Is the lack of rim protection, or the perceived lack of rim protection at this time, a concern for you?
Sure it is. There isn't much of it. I think you look to a guy like Rashawn Holmes for a little bit of that, but it's not, he's not an elite rim protector by any means. And, there's still questions about how much he can play with Sabonis. Can they be on the floor at the same time together? Or is Rashawn, assuming he's still around, going to be strictly a backup for Domas? We don't know that yet. So, and Keegan, I don't think we can really look to Keegan Murray for a lot of rim protection at this point either. So yeah, rim protection is an issue. I think you just hope that you have enough firepower offensively and you can clean up some of there's so much to get better at defensively that if you're not going to fix it all at once. So, maybe the rim protection, they've got to save that for another move down the road.
You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. And as the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home. It's no big deal, right? What are the odds that you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that can happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel when under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think that you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again, play it safe, and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. A lot of the questions that I have about the team defense for the Sacramento Kings, they're going to be questions that can't be answered really until the middle of the season, because I expect there to be an energy. I expect there to be a focus in training camp, especially defensively, maybe in preseason. Remember how last training camp went? We saw the video of Fox and Davion Mitchell going one-on-one. We saw the video of Tristan Thompson screaming after, I think, a blocked shot. And it's like, okay, you can see that energy. You can see that effort defensively. You go to opening night, you see Davion Mitchell strip Donovan Mitchell against the Utah Jazz and in the Golden Ones, and you're like, okay, defensively, this team has some grit to it. That lasted all of a couple of weeks until the Kings got punched in the mouth, got a pretty significant losing streak. And then for the rest of the season, it was as we've seen over the last 16 years, really. And I wonder, Jason, if Mike Brown can be the guy to keep that accountability. That's a word that we heard a lot last season. I think Harrison Barnes brought that word up by himself a handful of times during press conferences last season, is just keep that accountability. And how much of that accountability has to be on De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis, even if they are your primary scorers, even if they're absolutely your stars on this team? Do you think Mike Brown can be the guy who's able to pull Fox aside, pull Sabonis aside and say, look, you might have 25 points tonight, and we love what you're doing on the offensive end, but we need you to lead by example on defense as well?
Yeah, certainly. I think accountability is going to be a big word this year for this team. We'll see if Mike can achieve that. Look, they want this to work. One thing, and to your point, I think you do have to go straight to De'Aaron and straight to Domantas, and you have to ask them to really give as much as they can at that end of the floor. You know, we've asked, they've asked De'Aaron to do so much,
right?
Really through the first 5 years of his career, where, you know, he's got to be the engine and the head of the snake and all this, and also guard the point guards, because, you know, Buddy wasn't going to do it, and Tyrese could do it some, but look, they will go to those guys. They will ask them to look, give us everything you've got. And I think they're going to be motivated. Like, I'll point to Fox specifically. They just brought in Malik Monk, who is De'Aaron's college teammate. That backcourt doesn't work together if they're not going to guard their yard, so to speak. So those two guys, best friends, really close friends, let's say brothers. They've been described to me as brothers by people really close to them both. And if they want that to work, if they want to play together, whether it's starting or Malik's off the bench, that's another discussion. But if they want that pairing to work, they've got to work together. And, you know, I think they're going to be motivated to finally make this work. There's been a lot of here we go again in Sacramento over the last few years. And so while you might get these inspired efforts early, you know, when it starts to break down and the guy next to you isn't doing his job, and, you know, you've got one or two guys trying to cover for three or four guys who aren't getting it done, you know, the frustration just sets in, and we've all seen that over and over again. So I think those are going to be big factors. Accountability is going to be a huge thing. And look, they're going to try to set the tone early and hope that they can find something that works.
This is open for interpretation, but can De'Aaron Fox ever be a good defender consistently in this league? Or do you think being a fine defender with what he adds as a leader, what he adds as an offensive star, that's good enough for him to be what the Kings need him to be?
Yes, I think that if Fox can be an average defender, that's probably good enough. That's at least a good place to start.
Yeah.
We've all seen some elite, I don't know what am I looking for here? He has the ability to make the flashy play, the impossible play, the chase down block. He covers a lot of ground. Like, so we've seen flashes of that. It's a possession by possession basis where you've got to get down and stop that guy. You got to stop a guy for 2 or 3 dribbles, you know, and that's not all on Fox. I'm not implying that those comments in the past were all about De'Aaron, but they didn't exclude De'Aaron either. And so they need him to stay in front of his man, to at least make that guy make a decision, get off the ball here and there, go to a second option. They need him to be an average defender. And we all know that in spots, he has the ability to take it to a little bit higher level when he needs to.
It sounds like it's mainly a critical look at De'Aaron, especially I know people have talked about it from my perspective too, wanting more defensively from De'Aaron and posing the question, like, how much more can the Kings ask of him, especially in years past when if he wasn't doing everything quite literally, the Kings had little to no chance to win. Now you have this situation where De'Aaron has a player next to him in Domantas Sabonis, who he's never played before, a big man that he's never played with before, that is essentially what the Kings were hoping Marvin Bagley would be in terms of a big man guard pick and roll combo. And in addition to that, you've bolstered the depth of this team. You've added shooting. You've drafted a player like Keegan Murray, to where I'm not saying the Kings should rely on this if they want to be good, but you can see scenarios where if De'Aaron's having an off night, if he gets into foul trouble, if he's just having a rough shooting night, if he only scores 20, and I say only using air quotes, then the Kings still have a chance to win the game. That to me is really significant about what the Kings have done this offseason, Jason, and even going back to the trade deadline last year, bringing in Domantas Sabonis, is if I'm De'Aaron and I'm coming into this year, there's still the weight of expectation upon my shoulders. And I think De'Aaron knows that there's a major spotlight on him, especially to start the season. But at the same time, too, he has more help than he's ever had. And I wonder if that's going to lead to us seeing maybe a more free De'Aaron Fox instead of kind of a rigid and maybe overweight De'Aaron, not by the weight of expectations, not by the like body fat percentage.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, actually. And I think I think there's a good chance that is what we see. He's never had a player like Sabonis, you know, and you know, they got what, 15, maybe less than 15 games together last year.
Right.
Demonis played 15. Fox, I think, missed 5 of those, if I'm not mistaken. So it was somewhere between 10 and 15 games they played together. That is a huge thing. And the shooting and spacing, the shooting and the spacing are going to be better. When you add Monk, you add Herter, you add Keegan Murray, these are all guys who can hit at about a 40% clip or close anyway, from 3-point range. So when people are looking at the Kings and some of these national analysts, not many, but a couple, are starting to say, hey, look, the Kings might actually be knocking on the door of being a playoff team here. I think that's what they're looking at is the improved spacing and how much that opens up things, not just for De'Aaron, but also Domas, who needs space to work in the post and pass. And so you're going to have Fox and Sabonis running the 2-man game, pick and roll. You're going to have shooters potentially everywhere else that you can kick to. And I really do think that's going to open up a lot of things for this team offensively. And to your point, take some of that weight and that burden off of De'Aaron.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Bet Online. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. You can bet on preseason football right now if you want to. You're going to be able to bet on preseason basketball coming up in early October. And if you're crazy and think you can make money off of guessing those games or figuring out those games, hey, you're smarter than I am. But of course, with the regular season for both the NFL and NBA, MLB baseball going on right now, MLB playoffs are coming up shortly, future and prop bets surrounding all major sports. They even have NHL hockey, combat sports, esports, golf. They've got it all. BetOnline is the absolute right place for you to make that money. You're not going to find better lines, not going to find better odds. They continue to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening right now at BetOnline, where the game starts. A major topic of conversation lately, and it's no surprise because we're really in the dog days of the offseason right now, but Tyrese Haliburton and his feelings towards Sacramento is back in the news cycle. And Jason, I've tried to explain my understanding of the situation, my belief of who Tyrese Haliburton is based off of covering him the last couple of seasons. You are right there with me. It was mainly a digital coverage, not a in-person coverage like we normally get with players. And hopefully that's starting to change back to normal. Although we did get a little more in-person in the press conference room with Tyrese when he was here last season. But I look at this situation, and I go, I'm not necessarily mad at Tyrese because clearly he continues to be asked about this, and I kind of understand why. I would hope that Tyrese is smart enough. I believe Tyrese is smart enough to recognize why the Kings made this decision, how it's better for the Kings, just like in a lot of ways the Indiana Pacers improved for the path that they're on. But I'm a little tired. I'm a little frustrated of the narrative that it's like the Sacramento Kings betrayed Tyrese in some way or mistreated him in some way. He thought he was going to be a King for life, and suddenly he's traded away, and now he has this resentment towards the Kings organization, in his own words. What is your take on this entire scenario based off of who you understand Tyrese Haliburton to be, your thoughts on the move at the trade deadline where both the Pacers and Kings are at? Like, when you read this and think about all of this kind of maybe unnecessary drama, what are your thoughts on it?
I guess I would start by saying that look, Ty is a great kid and a great player, great family. Like nobody didn't like Tyrese Haliburton here. Okay. And the fans, I think, will probably always love him. Mm-hmm. All this talk, look, he was so public and vocal about it. He is an emotional guy. He cares a lot. I think we can't forget that, is just how much he cares and wants to win and wanted to be a part of something really special here in Sacramento. And so, yeah, he was hurt when that happened. But also, you know, look, this is a business, and nobody should take it that personally. Of course, it affects your life and the people around you, and all those things. And yeah, it can be hard to get over sometimes. But, I think some of this is like, I think back to the documentary on the Bulls and how much they made of Michael Jordan, just internalizing every little slight, everything anybody ever said or did. If you look at him funny, he was going to use that against you.
Mm-hmm.
And Tyrese wants to be great. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we even had conversations with Ty back then about that documentary and some of the things he took from it. And like, I think some of this is just Ty looking for an edge, looking for ways to motivate himself to be even better. And so, I don't think he should take it so personally. And I don't think, the people here in Sacramento should take it so personally either. I think this is probably pretty close to water under the bridge. We probably are not going to hear a lot about it going forward. Ty's going to have a great career, I'm sure. And a point I made even at the time of the trade is that Ty honestly should be flattered that he could, as a second-year player who was the 12 pick in the draft, he can get moved for a 2-time All-Star.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that just says so much about him, who he is as a player, who he is as a person. And I think we can just kind of leave it there. And pretty soon I think it's already time to move on. I think pretty soon everyone will move on.
It's maybe an unrealistic way to look at it, but I honestly think all sides deserve praise in this. Like you look at the Sacramento Kings, who acquired a 2-time All-Star for a second-year player, a player that fits with what the Kings are trying to do. Now, the Kings, of course, have to actually provide some results here this season. And if they do, I think this narrative completely goes away. I expect the Sacramento Kings to be significantly better than the Indiana Pacers. And I don't think that's offensive to the Pacers to say so. They're starting a rebuild, and Tyrese makes a lot more sense for that than De'Aaron Fox in his contract. And also, like, in this situation, I want to make sure it's very clear. And I think you would agree with this, Jason, like Tyrese, by my understanding, Tyrese is not the one calling these press conferences and telling reporters, hey, ask me about this. Like, Tyrese is being asked about it, and Tyrese has always been extremely open. That's one of the things that made him so likable amongst the media here in Sacramento. You'd ask Tyrese a question, you'd get a real answer, and he'd go in depth and he'd be honest. And while he wouldn't necessarily wear his emotions on his sleeve, he'd make it relatable. That's why I'm not surprised to see these answers, not surprised necessarily by these quotes, because I kind of have that idea of who Tyrese Haliburton is, but it's a narrative that I think is played out as much as it is because of Sacramento's reputation and less because of the trade itself. Because when you look at the trade, a team trades a young player for a proven all-star who's still in his prime with a couple of years left on his contract. That's happened a million times in the NBA over the course of the last 10 years. So how can the Kings really be blamed for something like that?
No, I mean, they can't. I mean, very few players have spent their entire career in one city. So this is the business. It is what happens. Look, Ty was very public in the Players Tribune piece that he wrote after the trade, which is why I think this gained so much traction in the first place. And even now, more recently, I believe I tried to stay away from this. I get about 20 or 30 days off a year, and I'm laying low right now. So I tried to stay away from this story as much as possible. I believe he was asked the question in this interview, but his answer was, it's funny, I was just writing about this the other day. So apparently he's still like journaling or whatever and writing about his own things that are still bothering him. And so he's pointed to this himself a couple of times. And I think that, yes, he's still being asked about it as long as he keeps talking so poignantly, and with emotion, maybe it will continue to come up here and there. But look, I think I agree with you. I think it's kind of run its course. I think it's an old story. I didn't write it this time around. When I saw the quotes, I kind of left it alone. Just figure it's kind of an old story. Everybody knows, the situation. And to your original point, look, I think both sides did get what they wanted here. Maybe not all sides, because I'm not sure it was what Ty wanted at the time. But he's going to have great career opportunities wherever he goes, whether that remains in Indiana or elsewhere. He's going to have a great career. He's going to have a lot of fun playing basketball, and I wish him the best.
Well, the last thing I have for you, and I know we're all looking forward to November 30th when the Indiana Pacers come to Sacramento. That's going to be a fun night, regardless if you're a Tyrese Haliburton fan or not. I expect Tyrese to come out, play hard, play well, and hopefully that'll be a fun night in the Golden One Center. But the last thing I have for you, Jason, going back to the Sacramento Kings talk specifically, I'm incredibly excited about training camp. I think this is the most excited I've been about a training camp because of the amount of just positional battles on this roster. You could talk about Monk versus Herter for the starting 2 spot. You could even talk about like backup roles and things like that. There's so many positional battles with this team that I think are going to be really interesting and really important to pay attention to. I'm actually going to be doing a series on those coming up here on Locked On Kings very soon. But what about, are there any positional battles specifically? Is there anything about this upcoming training camp that you as someone who covers the game, but obviously loves the game and follows the game as closely as you do, that excites you?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'll wrap up that previously. You just made me realize we are probably going to deal with this Haliburton stuff at least one more time.
Yeah.
when they return to Sacramento, I'm sure the question's going to come up. How do you feel now? But moving on, positional battles. Yeah, I think certainly the 2 spot is the most intriguing with Herter and Monk. I think it's a little bit of a toss up. Mm-hmm. I think in my mind, I would pencil in Kevin Herter because of the size and the length that he provides, because I think he may be able to give you a little more defensively. Playmaking, I think he's maybe a little bit of a better secondary playmaker, but we'll see. That's going to be a really interesting battle. Beyond that, I think there's going to be a really good battle for the 3rd point guard spot with Quinn Cook and Dellavedova. I think probably only one of those guys makes the team, so that certainly will be something that we're watching. I don't know. Those are the big question marks. Mm-hmm. I think you do have to look at what they're going to do in terms of the backup small forward role. Like, is Herter going to slide over to the 3? Can Keegan slide over to the 3 and give you some minutes there? Or KZ Okpala, is that going to be a guy who ends up with a role in the rotation because they need him to play some minutes at that spot. So those are the big ones, I think, for me. And yeah, they will be interesting, but I think we can all kind of look at the roster and see more or less how things probably will shape up right now. I think some of the big question marks come down to like those emergency, like 3rd string spots and the last guys who are going to make the roster.
Well, whether it's off-season, training camp, preseason, or regular season, Jason Anderson, the Sacramento Bee, always over King coverage. Jason, thank you so much for taking the time here on Locked On Kings. Hope you enjoyed the remainder of your off-season, because pretty soon we'll be back into the full-on grind. I personally can't wait, but then again, there are these slow times that we grow to appreciate, especially when we're in the middle of the trenches in like January and February. But I appreciate you, my guy.
You too, buddy. Nice to talk to you.
Huge thank you to Jason for joining me on today's episode of Locked On Kings. He does a great job again over at Sacramento Bee. Is a busy guy even right now, so to have him on is a real treat. And we go from one Jason to another. The current beat writer, Jason Anderson, filled in, or took over rather, for the former Sacramento Kings beat writer for the Sacramento Bee, Jason Jones. And Jason now works for The Athletic. He's, of course, a friend here of the Locked On Kings podcast. I've had him on many times before. Jason is going to join me later on this week. We have plenty to discuss. I know he's going to have thoughts on this Tyrese Haliburton situation. I know he's going to have thoughts on this overall Kings roster. He's covered the Kings for a long time, seen a lot of bad teams. So he'll be able to give us a straightforward answer about, is this the best Kings roster that the Kings have assembled during this 16-year playoff drought? We'll talk to Jason about that and more, so I hope you will join me on that episode. Until then, my name is Matt George. You have been listening to Locked On Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.